day, Gerald Gardner's radical religion, his feminist, eco-friendly, magical faith, has taken its place at the heart of our culture. Where once witches were persecuted and driven underground, today they can be out and proud. And if Gerald's legacy is becoming influential in the UK, in America his radical English faith has infiltrated the very heart of the establishment, the US military.
Roberta Stewart and Reverend Selena Fox are on a mission. Stewart's husband, Sergeant Patrick Stewart, was killed in combat last September in Afghanistan. The Nevada native was a Bronze Star and Purple Heart recipient. He was also a member of the Wiccan religion, whose symbol is the pentacle.
Stewart was refused a Wiccan memorial because the authorities viewed his faith as a cult and not as a true religion.
I said, "Where's my husband's plaque?" And they indicated that the emblem of our chosen faith was not allowed to be on there.
Since this test case in 2007, the Wiccan pentagram has been a religious symbol officially recognized by the US military and can be carved on the gravestones of service men and women who are killed in the line of duty.
How are you?
Hi, good to see you. Doing well.
I'm so glad to hear that. I'm so happy to have you here.
And I am doing our interview at the place with the better internet. We just have a new internet system here at Circle Sanctuary offices. So it's good to be here with you and to know of your work and to be part of your research.
Thank you so much. And I mean, it means everything to me to have you here because, you know, I started to explain in one of the emails that the first time I saw you ever was back in the mid-70s. And I was just like sort of breaking away from my family religion and discovering, you know, what I call the archaic revival, which was happening everywhere, and, you know, eclecticism. And I thought that I felt at home there, you know, and I was really the only one that I even knew at the time. Like, I was very much of an outsider at that point, you know. And when I saw you the first time, it was that documentary called The Occult Experience, the Geiger one. And I was so like taken with you and with Margot also. And just everybody that was on there, they really picked a pretty good group for that thing. I was, you know, impressed by it. I still promote it today sometimes because it still stands as one of the better, you know what I mean, overall documentaries that sort of served what we were trying to do. So it meant a lot to me just because I recognized the fact that it was not going to be that easy. You know what I mean? That there was a big gap in understanding and tolerance and everything. And, you know, as a 13, 14-year-old kid, it's intimidating. You know, it's almost enough to make you give up, you know. But I never gave up. And so when the internet first came into my life, I started right away jumping into it. And I had already done a bunch of things, you know, with the Unitarian and stuff like that. So I had already got trying feet wet and had really been able to present it on a bigger scale. So the internet was a humongous thing for me, as I know it was for Circle Sanctuary. I mean, you guys, you know, I know your history pretty well. And, you know, that whole process of going from, you know, a sort of more private local thing and your land holdings and whatnot, and then breaking into this whole, you know, this environment where you can reach the entire world. You know, it's amazing.
And with the earth, the spirit of this place. So mote it be.
So mote it be.
We consecrate this place as a sacred place of healing. We are part of a whole. We are part of all of Mother Earth, and it's important to see that and to work in harmony with the other life forms. And by putting that thought there, if enough people held that image in their mind, real magic would start happening on the planet. A few months ago, a national Catholic newspaper interviewed me, and the first thing I said to them was Jesus Christ was a witch, and it talked about how the path of Wicca and its love consciousness is real similar to what Christ was espousing. The golden rule we have is worded a bit differently, and harm none, do what you will, but it's the same thing. You know, it's loving your neighbor as yourself.
I wanted to say something about your history, your legacy, or let you, if you want. Either way, I can do it off the top of my head and you can feed off of it, or you can just kind of tell a little synopsis of your story. But, you know, and I want to tell you exactly how, what this thesis is, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
We can just go through that and because I think, honestly, I mentioned it to you, I mean, I consider you one of the most significant figures in this entire movement. And really, you know, I just was telling a good friend of mine that without you and people like Margot and stuff, the New Age movement might not have stuck the way that it did in the States. I mean, you're a significant influence on that, you know, in making Wicca a recognized religion, in, you know, the stuff you did to normalize it in the military, in prisons, all those things. I mean, you're the one. And so, you know, to me, it's you're not approachable by any other, you know what I mean, public figure in that sense. To me, you're one of the big giants in the whole thing. So, you know, for me, it's like a meeting or Wonder Woman or something like that. You know what I mean? So I hope you appreciate that. And I want you to know that even though we've been in minimal contact for all these years, if you go back and see what I've done, you know, you're always someone that I promote to people. You know, if you want to know what's really about, and you know what I mean, and see someone who's the real deal, you know, Selena Fox, you've got to see her, you know, don't pass go, so that type of thing. So, yeah, if you would maybe just tell me how you feel about your program and your role in all of it a little bit, so that I could have it for the record, and then we'll go from there. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Well, I really think part of my journey has ancestral connections on both my father's side and my mother's side. There are people I would call religious innovators. Some would call heretics.
Yeah, cool.
And so I have a diverse background. Some of my ancestors came to the United States for religious freedom purposes. So I have Quakers, I have Sabbatarians, I have some Roman Catholics and some Anglicans that found their own way once American Revolution happened. And so, and then even going back and doing the genealogy with some of the lines I've been able to take back, I've been able to discover if indeed the sources that I've worked with are 100% accurate. Some lines that go way, way back into time. So I've been fascinated by a number of different ancient cultures and folk practices from my earliest age. As I grew up, I was raised in a fundamentalist Southern Baptist household and was very active as a Southern Baptist for the first part of my life. And I was having mystical visions and experiences as I was growing up, and there wasn't the context within the Southern Baptist religion that I grew up in that really could explain all of that to me. So I was a senior in high school when I realized that the Southern Baptist path for religious identity and practice was too limiting, and continued to work with what I've called myself a mystic throughout my life. I think now I'm using the term nature mystic more than I've had for a time. And that's an esoteric term, and it's a more universalist term. But woven into all of that are Gnosticism and Hermeticism and paganism and pantheism and panentheism and mystery traditions and just a number of different forms of nature religion and nature spirituality. So some of the terms that I'm presently using, because they're more inclusive, in addition to Nature Mystic, which is actually a podcast I do on Sunday afternoons, and Nature Spirituality, which is the podcast I do on Wednesday nights.
Busy person, I know.
Are terms that
Amazing.
presently using, because they do encompass not only my own practices and my evolution as a soul in this incarnation, but they resonate with how Circle Sanctuary, the community, the church, the nature preserve, the institution has been evolving. And
Sure.
so I have felt a calling since I was a young girl and have had mystical experiences, peak experiences, spiritual transformative experiences since I was very, very young. The mythic, the mysterious.
All of that right along the lines of what we're going to be talking about too.
Absolutely. That's been hardwired in my psyche in this incarnation. And one of the wonderful things as I have matured and grown in this lifetime is being able to connect with people such as yourself who may have had some different journeys along the way, but are part of this community of people that are in the here and now, but are valuing the ancient wisdom of the past, and that also are looking towards the future. And so that's kind of an overall summary. I do think that one experience I had while I was an undergraduate at the College of William and Mary, Williamsburg, Virginia, was part of how I found my spiritual home. I have loved the classics, Greek and Roman cultures in particular, classical literature. I studied Latin in junior high and high school and took it on into college. I was a psych major at William and Mary, but the classics piece was there. And now, as a senior, looking back to my early years, I recognize it was a way of connecting with heritage, with philosophy, with the magic of the ancient pagan past. And, you know, some people have children, human children as part of their life journey. I've had organizations, land projects, and other endeavors. And so I birthed the Classics Club more than 50 years ago, and it continues to this day at the College of William and Mary. So I got this brainstorm that, well, in addition to reading our Ovid and discussing it over tea, we ought to experience.
Right, we're not just going to be one of these book clubs. Absolutely, that's fantastic.
And so I hatched this plan to have a rite of spring. It wasn't trying to recreate specifically a Greek or specifically a Roman religious event, but something that drew on the wisdom from the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans. And I had the entire classics faculty sign on to this.
That's
graduate students and some of the undergraduates. I was president of the honorary, so the Honor Society people from Eta Sigma Phi were there, and some of the Classics Club students were there, as well as the faculty and the grad students. So we are donning our flowing robes, tunics and togas, and ivy crowns.
That's amazing. Yes.
I still have the tambourine I played in that very first ritual, and carrying a Therses, you know, the Dionysian phallic wand. So I was my first public pagan ritual that I did as an academic exercise to encourage a broader and deeper understanding of classics, right? And when you have ancient chants and practices and you're aligning with ancient deity forms is part of an exercise. Well, if you're going to call the old ones, they can show up, and that's what happened to me. So I pretty much chart my my journey into pagan ministry and really finding my pagan home to the spring of 1971. And should you need a reference, when the Nutius celebrated the 100th anniversary of Eta Sigma Phi, the Classics Honor Society, I was one of the people invited to contribute to the special edition of the Nutius, which is, you know, Eta Sigma Phi's quarterly publication. So I can actually send you a link that describes in a shorter, more academic way about that experience.
And as a historian, basically, of all of this stuff, for me, like I was the next generation, I guess, right behind you, right? So I kind of kicked in the late 70s. And then I left my church. I grew up in church family also. And I was sort of ushered into the priesthood early. I was young, and I taught Sunday school and everything. And it was during that time period when I was teaching Sunday school, and they were trying to elevate me even further. When I was required to speak in front of the church assembly, and I started to read from the Bible and certain passages that I was asked to comment on as part of my sort of initiation, I guess, coming of age. And I started to speak of them more in a sort of medical sense. And that didn't really go over very well. They didn't want metaphor, you know what I mean, commentary. They didn't like that at all. And I was reprimanded pretty heavily. And then I went and did it again because I was being asked to talk about things that to me seemed obvious to be metaphorical. Whether they were actual historic events, stories or not, really was beside the point in my mind. You know what I mean? I have always seen that as like and it goes to what you were saying too, you know, connecting with these sort of archaic threads and pantheons of you know, deity imagery and you know, archetypes, if you will. To me, was what it was about. It wasn't about, you know what I mean, trying to still cling to something so much as it was to have it, bring it back to life in the present, you know what I mean? And so when I saw that it wasn't that way, and for them, you know, I was like, you know, I'm kind of a little bit creeped out by the fact that you don't understand that this is this. Like, now I'm scared almost, you know what I mean? Like, wow, that's dangerous, I thought, you know? And so I left that and discovered, you know, you and you know, all these great people around the world that were vibing where I was, you know? Everything, the symbology, the archetypes, just everything about the air about it, you know what I mean? Everything in the sort of universe of it seemed like just the obvious fit for me, you know? A lot of people get it, you know, start out getting into the craft or whatever version of connection that they make with the ancestors, druidry or, you know, this neo-shamanism and stuff like that, because it feels right to them. But a lot of them are got into it back then, especially because it was sort of a countercultural statement, I guess you would say. You know what I mean? And so when I saw interviews with you and others, I thought, wow, how much did it have been to be doing that interview at that time period when, you know, I mean, not that it wasn't at least spoken for and brought out into the air in the 60s, it was, you know, to a large extent, but it was still on the fringe. It was still something that carried with it this sort of taboo air. And sort of, you know, and anybody who is into the, you know, the great religions would say, don't stay away from that stuff. You know, even if they didn't have a knowledge of it or anything, you don't want to be dabbling in that. You're welcoming all the evil and all these sort of ideas. So
fact is that within Christianity and within Judaism, when you think, when you imagine in your mind, when you personify deity, for most people, it's male. And there's an old famous, it's not that old, but there's a famous saying by Mary Daly, if God is male, the male is God. And one reason that I think people are so attracted powerfully to magic and to the pagan religions is not only to worship, let's say, Mama in the sky instead of Papa in the sky. They want to be God. I mean, I think the fundamental thing about the magical religions and about pagan religions is that ultimately they say, within yourself, you are the God, you are the God.
That